When his father died, an 18-year-old was left with nothing but a rusty key and a cryptic note, while his older brothers inherited a 600-acre ranch. But what he discovered in a forgotten workshop would unravel a lifetime of secrets and change the definition of inheritance forever. If you've ever felt like the world counted you out, or that family wasn't what it was supposed to be, I need you to hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. We're building a community here for people who understand that the deepest cuts often come from the people closest to us. It's a place for stories that matter. The air in Mr. Albright's office was thick with the smell of old paper and furniture polish, a scent I'd come to associate with finality. It was the third time I'd been in that room. The first was with my dad years ago, when he was updating something or other, and I was just a kid bored out of his mind, tracing the patterns in the Persian rug with my sneaker. The second was the day after he died. A blur of handshakes and sympathetic murmurs that felt hollow and distant. This time, the third time, was for the reading of the will, the final act. My brothers, Mark and David, sat on the leather sofa opposite me. They were a matched set, 10 and 12 years my senior, broad-shouldered and confident in their dark suits. They looked like they belonged in rooms like this. I, on the other hand, felt like an interloper in my borrowed blazer, the sleeves just a little too short. I'd turned 18 2 months ago, an event that had passed with little fanfare, overshadowed by the steady decline of my father's health. Now, I felt about 12. Mr. Albright cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. He was a man made of straight lines and sharp angles, from his perfectly parted gray hair to the crisp crease in his trousers. He adjusted his spectacles and picked up the document on his mahogany desk. "We are gathered to execute the last will and testament of Mr. Robert Cole," he began, his voice a dry monotone that offered no comfort. I stared at the framed photo on his desk. It wasn't of his family, but of a sailboat cutting through blue water. An escape. I wanted an escape. I watched my brothers, their faces impassive, but for a subtle tension around their jaws. They knew what was coming, or at least they thought they did. They had spent the last decade positioning themselves as the heirs apparent, the responsible sons, while I was cast as the afterthought, the late-in-life surprise who had been Dad's shadow, but never, in their eyes, his equal. Dad and I were different. We were the quiet ones, while they were out learning the business of ranching, the finances, the land deals, the cold calculus of profit and loss. Dad was teaching me how to read the clouds, how to tell a red-tailed hawk from a Cooper's hawk by its flight pattern, how to fix a carburetor with little more than a piece of wire and a prayer. He taught me the soul of the ranch, while they were busy calculating its net worth. Mr. Albright's voice droned on, a river of legal jargon that was slowly washing away the last remnants of my old life. "To my eldest sons, Mark Cole and David Cole, I bequeath in equal shares the entirety of my real property, including the 600-acre parcel known as the Cole Ranch, with all its buildings, improvements, and associated livestock and equipment." A quiet exhale from the sofa. David shot a quick, triumphant glance at Mark. It was so fast I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching for it. They had won. The ranch, our home, the only place I had ever known, was theirs. I felt the floor drop out from under me, a sickening lurch in my stomach. I had expected it, prepared for it even, but the reality of the words was a physical blow. I felt the sting of tears behind my eyes and forced them back, focusing on a water stain on the ceiling. I would not cry in front of them. Mr. Albright continued, his tone unchanging. All accounts, investments, and financial instruments are to be liquidated, with the proceeds to be divided equally between Mark Cole and David Cole, after all estate debts are settled. Of course, they got the land, and they got the money to run it. And me? The room was silent for a moment. Mr. Albright looked up, his gaze finding mine for the first time. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of something that wasn't pity. It was expectation. "And to my youngest son, Jacob Cole," he said, and my brothers both shifted, leaning forward slightly. "I bequeath the contents of the lockbox kept in my office, which includes a check for $5,000 for his immediate needs." He slid a small manila envelope across the desk towards me. It seemed impossibly small. $5,000. A pittance. An insult. Enough to get a cheap apartment and a security deposit, and then I would be on my own. "Furthermore," Mr. Albright said, holding up a single rusty key between his thumb and forefinger, "I bequeath to Jacob the key to the old workshop and all personal effects contained therein. He is to be given a period of 48 hours to retrieve these items from the property." He dropped the key onto the desk. It landed with a soft, metallic clink that sounded like a final closing door. Personal effects. Junk. The old workshop was where Dad kept his failed projects, his half-finished carvings, his collection of broken clocks and radios he always meant to fix. It was a museum of good intentions. My brothers were leaving me my father's garbage. Mark stood up, all business. "Thank you, Mr. Albright. We'll be in touch regarding the transfer." He didn't look at me. David followed, clapping the lawyer on the shoulder. "Appreciate your efficiency, Bill." As they walked past my chair, David paused. He looked down at me, his expression a careful mixture of sympathy and condescension. "Listen, Jake," he said, his voice low. "Don't worry. We'll make sure you land on your feet. That $5,000 should be a good start for you." It wasn't an offer of help. It was a dismissal, a severing. I just nodded, unable to speak. I picked up the envelope and the key. The key was cold and heavy in my palm. I walked out of that office and into the blinding afternoon sun, the legal documents' words echoing in my head. I was 18 years old. I had $5,000, a key to a shed full of junk, and I was, for all intents and purposes, homeless. I was an orphan. The world had never felt so big or so empty. That first night was the worst. I checked into a motel off the highway, the kind with flickering neon signs and carpets that smelled of stale smoke and disinfectant. The room was a beige box, utterly anonymous. I sat on the edge of the stiff bed, the manila envelope and the key on the nightstand beside me. I hadn't opened the envelope yet. As long as it was sealed, it was still potential. Once I opened it and saw the check, it would just be a number, a countdown timer on my life. The loneliness was a physical presence. It was in the hum of the ancient air conditioner, the rumble of trucks on the interstate, the thinness of the scratchy blanket. For my entire life, if I woke up in the night, I could hear the sounds of the ranch, the sigh of the wind in the cottonwoods, the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of the old farmhouse settling. Those sounds were the texture of home, the rhythm of my heart. Now there was only the sterile silence of a rented room. I thought about my father. I tried to conjure his voice, the easy laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes, the feel of his calloused hand on my shoulder. But the grief was too raw, too close. All I could feel was the gaping hole he'd left behind, a void that seemed to pull all the light and warmth from the world. And a new feeling was starting to curdle in the pit of my stomach, a bitter, confusing anger at him. Why had he done this? Why had he cut me out? He had to have known what Mark and David were like. He had to have known they would see me as a problem to be managed, not a brother to be helped. Was this his final lesson, that the world is cold and you're on your own? It didn't square with the man who had spent hours teaching me how to tie a fly, who had sat with me all night when my dog was sick, who had told me more times than I could count, "This land, Jake, it's in our blood. It's more than dirt and grass. It's memory." I finally picked up the key. It was an old skeleton key, pitted with rust, the kind you'd see in a fairy tale. The workshop. He'd left me the workshop. I thought of the dusty space, crammed with his hobbies, the smell of cedar shavings and motor oil, the stacks of National Geographic magazines, the workbench, scarred with 1,000 cuts and burns, where he'd taught me to solder, to weld, to see how things fit together. It was our place, his and mine. The brothers never went in there. They called it Dad's mess. My anger shifted. It wasn't a punishment. It couldn't be. It was a message. My father wasn't a cruel man. He was a complicated one. He was a quiet man who thought in layers. This whole thing, the formal will, the bizarre inheritance of a shed, it was a construction, just like one of his intricate clockworks. He had built something, and he'd left me a key. The next morning the phone rang, startling me from a fitful sleep. It was an unknown number. "Jacob Cole?" a familiar, dry voice asked. It was Mr. Albright. "Yes, sir," I said, sitting up, my heart starting to thump. "I trust you're situated," he said. It wasn't a question. "I just wanted to clarify a point regarding the will. The stipulation regarding your retrieval of personal effects is time-sensitive. Your brothers have been advised that you have a 48-hour window which began upon the conclusion of our meeting yesterday. I would advise you not to delay." "Why?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "They're just going to throw it all out?" There was a pause. For the first time, a crack appeared in his professional veneer. "Your father was a very specific man, Jacob. He chose his words and his actions with great care. He did not consider the contents of that workshop to be junk. He referred to them as the most important part. I am merely advising you to adhere to the timeline he established. The most important part." The words hung in the air after he'd hung up. My father, the man who had just effectively disowned me in front of my brothers, had told his lawyer that a shed full of scraps was the most important part of his legacy. It made no sense. And yet, it was the first glimmer of hope I'd had in weeks. It was a breadcrumb, a clue. I got up, showered, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of something other than grief or despair. I felt purpose. I had a key. I had a deadline. And I had a mystery to solve. I had to get back to the ranch. The bus ride was a journey backward in time. With every mile that clicked by, the concrete and steel of the city dissolved into the rolling green and gold hills of my childhood. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the familiar landscape slide by. That stand of oaks where we'd seen the bald eagle. The creek where Dad taught me to skip stones so they'd jump 7, 8, 9 times. Every landmark was a memory, and every memory was a fresh wave of grief. But now, it was mixed with something else. An urgent curiosity. I wasn't just returning to the scene of my loss. I was on a mission. The bus wheezed to a stop in the center of town, a place with one stoplight, a general store, and a diner. A few people turned to look as I stepped off. I saw Mrs. Gable, who ran the post office, her face softening with sympathy. I saw Tom, the mechanic, give me a sad, tight-lipped nod. News traveled fast here. I was now the poor coal boy, the one who got left out. My cheeks burned. I ducked my head and started the 2-mile walk up the county road to the ranch. The long driveway was lined with the cottonwood trees Dad had planted with his own father. Their leaves were already starting to turn, a spray of yellow against the deep blue sky. They rustled in the breeze, a sound that used to feel like a welcome. Today it felt like a whisper, sharing gossip about the returning outcast. The house stood at the top of the hill, a sprawling 2-story farmhouse that had been added onto over generations. It looked the same, but it felt different, hostile, a fortress that was no longer mine. Mark's polished pickup truck was parked near the front porch. As I got closer, the front door opened and he stepped out, blocking my path. He had his arms crossed over his chest, a posture I knew well. It was his "I'm the adult here" stance. "Jake," he said, his voice flat, "what are you doing here?" "I'm here for my things," I said, holding up the key. "Mr. Albright said I have 48 hours. "Right," he scoffed. "Dad's junk. Look, just be quick about it. David and I have a meeting with a developer this afternoon. We don't need you underfoot." A developer? Already? The word hit me like a stone. Dad had been gone less than a month, and they were already carving it up, selling it off. The memory of his words came back to me, sharp and clear. "This land is memory, Jake." For them, it was just an asset waiting to be liquidated. "Where's the key?" Mark asked, impatient. I realized he meant the key to the house. I shook my head. "The key Mr. Albright gave me, for the workshop." He grunted, a sound of annoyance. "Fine, it's unlocked. Just take what you want and go. And don't wander around. You're a guest here now, understand?" A guest. The word was a slap. I had spent my entire life in that house, on that land. My height was marked in pencil on a doorframe in the kitchen. I had buried 2 dogs and a cat under the big oak tree. I had fallen out of the hayloft and broken my arm. This place was written into my bones, and now I was a guest. I didn't say anything. I just walked past him, my gaze fixed on the familiar, weathered shape of the old workshop set back behind the main barn. It was a simple board and batten structure with a sagging roof and windows clouded with years of dust. To anyone else, it was an eyesore. To me, it was a sanctuary. The door was unlocked, as Mark had said. I pushed it open, and the scent hit me first. That unique, irreplaceable smell of my father. It was sawdust and oil, old paper and welding flux, and the faint, sweet smell of the pipe tobacco he used to smoke before he quit. My throat tightened. I stepped inside, and it was like stepping into a photograph. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. The half-carved block of cedar on the workbench, a half-formed owl staring with one detailed eye. The jumble of wires and vacuum tubes from an old radio splayed out on a side table. The neat rows of tools hanging on the pegboard, each with a black ink silhouette drawn around it, so you'd know exactly where it went back. This wasn't a mess. This was a system. This was his mind, laid bare. I ran my hand over the workbench, the wood worn smooth as river stone in the places he'd stood for hours on end. I could feel him here, his patience, his quiet concentration. I wasn't just here to get my things. I was here to say goodbye. But Mr. Albright's words echoed in my mind. The most important part. I started to look, Really look at the workshop not as a collection of memories, but as a puzzle. Where would he hide something? My dad wasn't a man for safes or safety deposit boxes. He believed the best hiding place was the one no one would ever think to look, or the one that was too much trouble to get to. I scanned the shelves, crammed with coffee cans full of nuts and bolts, stacks of old farming almanacs, and cigar boxes filled with fuses and resistors. It would take days to go through it all, and I checked my watch, about 30 hours left. Then I remembered something, a conversation from years ago. I'd been helping him fix the mower, and I'd dropped a small screw. It had rolled under the heavy workbench and disappeared into the shadows. "Don't worry about it," he'd said with a wink. "The floor monster got it. He gets all the good stuff." I had asked him what he meant, and he had knelt down, showing me a loose floorboard right under the center of the bench. "Every good workshop needs a secret compartment," he'd said, "for treasures." At the time, I'd looked inside and seen only a few shiny ball bearings and a couple of old coins. Treasures for a 10-year-old. Now I knelt down in the same spot, dust motes dancing in the shafts of light from the grimy window. My heart hammered against my ribs. I found the edge of the board and pried it up. It came away with a soft groan of old wood. The space beneath was dark. It wasn't empty. Reaching into the dark, my fingers brushed against cold, hard metal. I pulled it out. It was an old military-style footlocker, heavy and solid, and on the front, a sturdy lock. I looked at the rusty key in my hand. It wasn't for the workshop door. It was for this. With a trembling hand, I inserted the key into the lock. It was stiff, but with a bit of force, it turned. The click of the tumblers falling into place was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I lifted the heavy lid. The inside was not a jumble of treasures. It was neat, organized. On top lay a thick, leather-bound journal, its pages filled with my father's familiar, slanted handwriting. Beside it were several large bundles of letters, tied with twine, and beneath them a very thick, official-looking document, bound with a blue cover sheet. The first thing I picked up was the journal. I opened it to the first page. The date was from just after my 10th birthday. The entry was short. "Decided today, it's the only way to protect him, to protect the land. They won't understand, but Jake will. Someday, he'll have to." I sank back on my heels, the cold concrete seeping through the knees of my jeans. This wasn't a whim. This was a plan, a decade-long plan. I set the journal aside, my hands shaking too much to read any more. I picked up the top bundle of letters. They were addressed to me. "For Jake, when you're ready." I untied the twine. The paper was thick, creamy, the kind he used for important correspondence. The date on the first letter was from 2 years ago, right around the time he got his initial diagnosis. My name was at the top. "My dearest Jake," it began. I had to stop and take a deep breath, the air in my lungs feeling thin and sharp. I could hear his voice in the words, as clear as if he were standing beside me. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and I am sorry. I am sorry for the pain you must be in, and I am sorry for the confusion I have surely caused you. The will reading must have been a hard day. I need you to know that what I did out of love. A complicated, difficult love, maybe, but love all the same. You know your brothers. You know they are good men in many ways, but they are their mother's sons. They see the world in terms of dollars and cents, assets and liabilities. They never saw the ranch the way we do. They never felt its heartbeat. For years, I have watched developers circle this valley like vultures. They see 600 acres of prime real estate, perfect for a golf course or a gated community. Mark and David see the same thing. They see a payday. They see their escape from a life they never truly wanted. I could not bear the thought of this land, our home, being paved over. I could not bear the thought of the creeks being rerouted, the old oaks being cut down, the memories being bulldozed into oblivion. Disinheriting them outright would have led to a long, ugly court battle that would have bled the estate dry and likely failed. They would have painted me as a senile old man and you as a manipulative child. They would have won. So I had to create a different path, a test. I had to give them what they thought they wanted, to let their own nature reveal itself. I gave them the surface, the house, the cattle, the grass, the illusion of wealth. But the real value of this place, Jake, isn't on the surface, it's underneath. About 15 years ago, a geologist friend of mine was doing some survey work in the county. On a hunch, I had him take a look at our land. He did it discreetly, over a few weekends, disguised as a hunting trip. What he found was astonishing. The granite shelf that runs under this whole valley is laced with spodumene. That's a rock that contains a high concentration of lithium. It's not just a little bit, son. It's one of the most significant deposits in the state. Back then, it was a geological curiosity. Now, with the world shifting to electric vehicles and battery storage, it's a gold mine, a silver ocean. I had to put the letter down. My head was spinning. Lithium. I knew the word from science class. It was in batteries, in phones, in cars. I looked around the dusty workshop, at the familiar, worthless junk, and then back at the letter. It felt like I was in a dream. I picked it up again and continued reading. I spent the next several years quietly and legally separating the mineral rights from the surface rights of the property. It's a complex but entirely legal process. The land title is for the surface. The house, the fields, the right to graze and farm. That's what I left to Mark and David. The mineral estate, the legal right to explore, drill, and extract any and all minerals below the surface, is a separate entity. I had it titled to a holding company, and the sole share of that company is what I am leaving to you. It's in that blue folder. The will gives them the ranch, but the document in this box gives you the power. You own what's underneath. And the law is very clear, Jake. The mineral estate is the dominant estate. The surface estate is the servient one. That means you have the right to use the surface in any way that is reasonably necessary to extract the minerals. You can build roads. You can drill test bores. You can, if you choose, turn their pristine future golf course into a very, very large open pit. I have left them a beautiful house with a worthless basement. They think they inherited a kingdom, but they've inherited a cage. And you, my son, hold the key. I let the letter fall into my lap. I couldn't breathe. It was too much. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. The cold, brilliant strategy. He had checkmated them from the grave. He had armed me. But the letter wasn't finished. I picked it up one last time, my eyes blurry. This is a heavy burden, I know. You hold their future, and the future of this land, in your hands. You have a choice. There is a mining conglomerate that has been sniffing around for years. Their contact information is in the folder. You could sell these rights to them tomorrow and walk away with more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes. More than your brothers would ever see from their development deal. No one would blame you. You could disappear, start a new life, and never look back. Or you can use this power as a shield. You can use it to protect the land. You can force your brothers to the table. You can make them understand that this ranch is not for sale. Not now, not ever. You can save our home. I don't know which path you'll choose. I only know that I raised you to be a good man with a good heart. I trust you, Jake. Whatever you decide, I trust you. The choice is yours. The ranch is in your hands now. Your loving father. I couldn't hold it back anymore. I put my head in my hands and I cried. I cried for my father, for the years he carried this secret, for the pain he must have felt knowing his older sons would betray his legacy. I cried for the lonely, brilliant man who had to construct such an elaborate, heartbreaking puzzle to protect the things he loved. I cried for the scared, lost boy I had been just 24 hours ago. And I cried for the man I was supposed to become, a man holding a weapon he never asked for, facing a choice that felt impossibly large. Okay, I have to pause here. Reading that letter, sitting there on that cold concrete floor, it broke me, and it rebuilt me all at once. It was the moment my entire life pivoted. Everything I thought was true was turned upside down. If you've ever received a message from the past that changed your entire future, a letter, a voicemail, a long hidden secret, I want you to tell me about it in the comments. I'm going to read every single one, because that moment, that feeling of the world shifting under your feet, is something we need to talk about more. You are not alone in that. Now, let's get back to the workshop. For a long time, I just sat there, the letters in my lap, the dust motes swirling in the air like tiny, silent stars. The weight of my father's trust was heavier than the footlocker. He had handed me a thunderbolt. I looked at the blue folder. It was thick, just as he'd said. I opened it. Inside were geological surveys, dense with maps and figures, assay reports with staggering percentages, and a single crisp share certificate for a company I'd never heard of. Cottonwood Creek Holdings, LLC. My name was typed neatly on the line for the owner. There was also a business card for a man named Arthur Vance, a senior acquisitions executive at a massive mining corporation. This was the easy way out. One phone call. I could be on a plane to anywhere in the world by the end of the week, leaving the dust of this place and the ghosts of my family behind me. I could buy my own ranch, 1,000 ranches. The thought was intoxicating. No more fighting, no more feeling like the outcast. Just freedom. Pure, simple, uncomplicated freedom. I thought of Mark's smug face in the lawyer's office. I thought of David's condescending hand on my shoulder. I thought of the word guest. Selling would be the perfect revenge. It would be absolute. They wanted to sell the ranch for a few $1 million to build a playground for the rich? Fine. I'd sell the ground beneath it for $100 million and let a mining company tear it all to hell. They would get nothing but dust and noise and the bitter taste of their own greed. I actually reached for my phone. My thumb hovered over the numbers on the screen. I could do it. I could end it all right now. But then my eyes fell on the other object in the box, the one I hadn't touched yet. It was wrapped in oilcloth, heavy and dense. I unwrapped it. It was my father's geological hammer. It was a beautiful tool, a solid piece of steel with a pointed pick on one end and a flat hammer on the other. The wooden handle was dark with sweat and oil, worn smooth to the shape of his grip. He had taken me rock-hounding with this hammer a dozen times, up in the high pastures where the granite outcroppings were. He'd shown me how to split a rock cleanly, how to spot the glimmer of quartz or mica. He wasn't looking for lithium then. He was just looking for wonder. He was teaching me to pay attention, to see the story written in the stones. Holding the hammer, I could feel the faint vibration of his presence. He hadn't just given me a legal weapon. He had given me a choice, a moral choice. His letter hadn't said, "Avenge me." It had said, "I trust you." What would he want? The man who taught me to identify birds by their songs, who spent an entire winter building a sanctuary for barn owls in the hayloft, who got up in the middle of the night to help a cow birth her calf. Would that man want his home, the place he loved more than anything, to become an open-pit mine? No. The money was the leverage. It was the tool. But it wasn't the purpose. The purpose was the land, the ranch. My anger at my brothers slowly cooled, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. Revenge would be sweet, but it would be fleeting. And it would come at the cost of the one thing my father had spent his life trying to protect. Saving the ranch, that would be a victory that lasted. That would be a legacy. That would be honoring him. I spent the night in the workshop. I didn't dare go back to the house. I found an old horse blanket, thick and smelling of wool and dust, and wrapped it around myself against the encroaching chill. I didn't sleep. I read every letter my father had left me. He told me stories about his own childhood on the ranch. He told me about my mother, who had died when I was too young to remember her. He wrote about his pride in me, the way I was quiet and watchful, the way I seemed to understand the land without needing it explained. He apologized for not being able to tell me this to my face, for having to build this wall of secrets between us to protect me. By the time the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the dirty windows, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't the scared kid in the motel anymore. I wasn't the outcast. I was the steward. My father had left me a job to do, and I was going to do it. The sun was just cresting the eastern ridge when I made the call. Not to the mining company, to Mr. Albright. He answered on the second ring, his voice sharp and alert, as if he had been sitting by the phone all night. "Mr. Albright," I said, my own voice steady, surprising me with its firmness. "It's Jacob Cole." There was a pause, and in that silence, I felt the entire dynamic between us shift. I was no longer a grieving boy. I was a client, a principal. "Jacob," he said, and the formality was different now. It was laced with respect. "I've been waiting for this call. Did you find the footlocker?" "I did," I said. "I've read the letters. I understand what he did." "And?" he asked, the single word hanging in the air, pregnant with meaning. "I'm not selling to the mining company," I said. "I want to save the ranch. I need you to tell me what to do next." I could almost hear the smile in his voice. "Excellent," he said, a word I never thought I'd hear him use. "Your father hoped you would make this choice. He left very specific instructions. The first step is to file an immediate injunction against any sale or development of the property, citing the primacy of the mineral estate. I have the paperwork drafted and ready to go. It will freeze any deal your brothers have in motion." "And then?" "And then," Albright said, his voice taking on a predatory calm, "we inform their prospective buyers, this golf course developer, that the land they intend to purchase is subject to extensive and potentially disruptive geological exploration. We send them copies of the surveys. We let them know that their pristine fairways might soon be host to drilling rigs and heavy machinery. Their financing will evaporate overnight." It was brutal. It was brilliant. It was my father's final move on the chessboard. "And my brothers?" I asked. "They will be notified that their ownership of the surface estate is contingent. They will be given a choice. They can agree to live on and work the ranch under a new set of covenants that prohibit its sale and preserve it as a working agricultural entity, in which case you might agree to lease them the mineral rights for a nominal fee, say $1 a year, with the lease being revocable if they violate the terms. Or they can refuse, in which case you are free to lease the mineral rights to the highest bidder. The choice," he said, echoing my father's letter, "will be theirs." "Do it," I said, without hesitation. "File the injunction. Notify everyone. It's time." "Consider it done, Jacob," he said. "I'll call you back when the hornet's nest has been officially kicked." I hung up the phone and stood up, stretching my stiff limbs. The workshop was filled with the cool, clean light of morning. For the first time in my life, I wasn't my father's son or Mark and David's little brother. I was just me, and I had a home to fight for. It didn't take long. Less than 2 hours later, I heard the sound of a truck barreling up the driveway, spitting gravel. It slammed to a stop outside the workshop. The doors flew open. Mark and David. Their faces were unrecognizable. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by a blotchy, red-faced fury. They stormed into the workshop, David in the lead, waving a piece of paper in his hand. It must have been the fax from Albright. "What the hell is this, Jake?" he roared, his voice cracking. "What is this mineral rights garbage? This is a joke, right?" Mark was right behind him, his eyes wide with a kind of panicked disbelief. "Dad would never do this. You're lying. You forged this." I didn't say anything. I just stood by the workbench, my father's geological hammer in my hand. I wasn't holding it like a weapon, just resting my hand on it. It grounded me. "It's all there, David," I said, my voice quiet and even. "In a box Dad left for me. The surveys, the title to the mineral estate. It's all legal. Mr. Albright has the originals." "Mineral rights?" Mark sputtered. "There's nothing here but rock and dirt. This is worthless." "Is it?" I asked. I walked over to the footlocker and took out one of the assay reports. I handed it to him. "That's a report from a geological survey. That worthless rock under our feet happens to be one of the richest lithium deposits in the region. Your golf course developers' financiers might find that interesting. I believe Mr. Albright sent them a copy." Mark's eyes scanned the page, his face going from red to a sickly pale white. He understood numbers. He understood what he was seeing. He looked from the paper to me, and for the first time, I think he was actually seeing me. Not the kid brother, but a stranger holding all the cards. David snatched the paper from him. He couldn't make sense of the technical data, only the bottom line. "This is insane," he whispered. "This can't be real." "It's real," I said, "and it's mine. Dad gave you the surface. He gave me what's underneath. And the law says my rights are dominant. That means your deal with the developer is dead." "You can't do this," David shouted, finding his voice again. "We're your brothers. This is our inheritance." "Our inheritance," I said, the words tasting like metal, "was this ranch, this home, a legacy you were going to sell to the highest bidder less than a month after Dad died. You don't get to talk about inheritance." I looked them both in the eye. The anger was gone. All I felt was a deep, profound sadness. "You have a choice," I said, using the words from Albright, from my father. "The deal is off. You can stay. You can work this ranch with me the way Dad would have wanted. We can put it in a trust, protect it forever. Or you can refuse. And I will call the mining company on this card right here, and I will lease them the rights to turn every single one of your 600 acres into a quarry. They seem to think it's worth about $200 million. I wonder how much of the surface they'll need to get to it. The silence in the workshop was absolute. The only sound was the wind whistling through a crack in the wall. They stared at me, their minds racing, the gears turning as they processed the magnitude of their defeat. They weren't just losing a development deal. They had lost the ranch. They had lost it the moment they decided it was for sale. Mark was the first to break. He just shook his head, a look of utter desolation on his face, and walked out. David lingered for a moment, his eyes filled with a toxic mix of hatred and helplessness. "You'll regret this," he snarled. "No," I said, picking up the geological hammer and placing it carefully back in the box. "I'm just getting started." He turned and stormed out, and I was left alone in the quiet of the workshop, the sun streaming in. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But the war had been won. I had a home. The months that followed were a blur of legal meetings, paperwork, and hard physical labor. Mark and David, faced with the undeniable truth of the legal situation, folded completely. They couldn't fight, and their pride wouldn't let them stay and work under me, their little brother. They took a settlement, a fraction of what they had expected, which I paid for by leasing a tiny remote corner of the property for a single exploratory bore, a symbolic move that cemented my control. And then they were gone. They packed their things and left without a word, leaving the big house feeling empty and vast. The silence they left behind was not peaceful. It was heavy, filled with the ghosts of arguments and unspoken resentments. At first, I stayed in the workshop, sleeping on a cot. It felt more like home than the house did. I spent my days walking the land, from one fence line to the other, all 600 acres. I was reintroducing myself to it, not as a boy living on his father's property, but as its caretaker. I saw it with new eyes. I saw the fences that needed mending, the irrigation ditches that were clogged with silt, the barn roof that was losing shingles. The task ahead was enormous, overwhelming. I wasn't a rancher. I was a kid who knew how to fix things. One afternoon, while I was trying to get an old tractor to turn over, a dusty truck pulled up. It was Tom, the town mechanic, the one who had nodded at me when I got off the bus. He got out, a wrench in his hand. "Heard you were having some trouble," he said, gesturing at the tractor. "Your dad always had a hell of a time with this old girl. The trick is the choke. You gotta sweet-talk it." He spent the next hour with me, not just showing me how to fix the tractor, but talking. He told me stories about my dad, things I'd never known. How my dad had co-signed a loan for him to start his garage. How he'd plowed the church parking lot every winter for 30 years without ever being asked. Slowly, other people started to appear. Mrs. Gable from the post office brought by a casserole, "So you don't waste away." A neighboring rancher, a man I barely knew, showed up one Saturday with his 2 sons and helped me restring a half-mile of downed fence. They didn't ask for anything. They just said, "Your dad was a good neighbor." They weren't just helping me. They were honoring him. They were showing me what community meant. I finally moved into the house. I started with one room, my old bedroom, and slowly I started to clean, to reclaim the space. I took down the pretentious artwork my brother's mother had put up and found the old landscape paintings my father had loved. I made it my own. The legal side was handled by Mr. Albright. We established a conservation trust, placing the entire ranch into permanent protection. It could never be subdivided, never be developed. It would remain a working ranch and a wildlife habitat forever. The mineral rights were the shield, folded into the trust as the ultimate defense against any future attempts to break it. The lithium would stay in the ground. Its value wasn't in money. Its value was in its power to protect the surface. One evening, as spring was turning the hills a vibrant, impossible green, I was standing on the porch, watching the sun set behind the western ridge. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and new grass. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty anymore. It felt settled. It felt like mine. I realized my father had given me more than just the ranch. He had given me a purpose. He had given me a community that was waiting to rally around me. He had given me a chance to become the man he had always hoped I would be. The inheritance wasn't the land or the mineral rights. It was the choice, the responsibility. It was the lesson that the richest things in life aren't the things we sell, but the things we refuse to. He hadn't left me alone at all. He had left me a map and the tools to follow it. And for the first time since he died, I felt a deep, unshakable peace. I was home. What my father taught me with that final, complicated gift was that sometimes the people who love us have to protect us in ways we can't understand at the time. He built a fortress of secrets around me, not to keep me out, but to keep the world at bay until I was strong enough to face it. He knew that true inheritance isn't something you're given in a lawyer's office. It's something you earn through your choices. It's the values you choose to uphold. What does inheritance mean to you? Is it money and property? Or is it the stories, the values, and the purpose handed down to you? Let me know in the comments below. I truly want to hear your stories, because every family has its own complicated legacy. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in second chances and fighting for what's right, then please subscribe and become part of this community. We're all just trying to find our way home, trying to make sense of the maps we've been given. And sometimes, the most valuable treasure is hidden in the last place you'd ever think to look. And the key has been in your pocket the whole time. The sun has set over the west pasture now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. A couple of barn owls just swooped out of the hayloft, starting their nightly hunt. It's quiet. It's peaceful. And for the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid of what tomorrow will bring. I'm just ready for it.